Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Jam 58, HTML5 Web Apps for Enterprise, supporting BlackBerry 6 and beyond. I feel like I should be like Buzz Lightyear up here, to infinity and beyond, to BlackBerry 6 and beyond. Anyways, my name is Jim Ng. I'm an enterprise mobility architect with Research in Motion. I've been working in web development for about 15 years, so I've seen quite a bit. Actually, when I first started out, I started doing like WAP and WML and mobile technologies like that. And back then, they said, oh yeah, mobile's the next best thing. And every year they kept saying that, and we just never got there. But finally, now with HTML5 technologies, I actually see that as something that actually has potential now. So I'm really excited about where we're headed with BB10 and like our commitment to HTML5 technologies, because I think this is definitely the way to go, especially for enterprise, because you guys kind of you basically want to, this write once mentality, right? You just basically, just want to write the application once. You don't have to want to port it to, all the other native platforms like iOS, Android, Windows, right? Every time, you want to make a change, you're supporting it across all these different platforms. So HTML5, it's definitely getting closer. It's not, the silver bullet yet. I think it gets us probably like, 80 to 90% of the way there. So that's where I kind of see the promise. So I'm actually going to try to do this entire presentation off my playbook, so bear with me as I kind of figure this out. Okay, so this is the agenda here. So I'm just basically going to cover a little bit of context, just to give you a little bit of background. So just kind of go over mobile and enterprise, basically what is mobile, how does it apply to the enterprise, and then I want to cover the actual capabilities of mobile devices. And, because I think that's, definitely a differentiator. If you're used to doing desktop development, mobile is, it's much better. But then, of course, you have some constraints, right? Screen size, stuff like that. And then I'll talk about the actual strategy, just kind of like a general strategy of how you can kind of, get around those constraints. And then I'm actually going to kind of get into some details about choosing your frameworks. So there's a lot of frameworks out there. There's probably like a new framework every week. And, it's kind of hard to, sift through all those. But I'll try and, kind of give you kind of a strategy for that as well, and looking at all the different libraries. And then I'll talk about responsive design. This is probably, I guess, the most important thing when you're talking about different screen sizes, right? You have to support a little phone like that, tablets. You might want your application to actually still run off like a mobile web, so you might want people to still be able to access it, just from a regular web browser. So you still want to support desktop, right? So you have different sizes. People have netbooks, they have laptops. They have huge, these, 26-inch screen, 1920 by 1080 screens. So, yeah, a lot of different things that you have to support. Then I'm going to just cover some general tips on like design, performance tips, just stuff that our team has kind of encountered out in the field. So stuff that, you can kind of probably use for your projects. And I'm hoping to have enough time for a demo at the end. So I've got quite a few slides, so I'm going to try and do this quickly so I can get to the demo. Okay, so definitely, why go mobile? If you kind of look at the numbers, if you kind of look at where desktop PCs were, back in the 90s, there was about 100 million plus PCs out there. And then, about 10 years later, you look at, the desktop internet, and, it basically, exploded, 10 times, up to, 1 billion plus, users out there. And then, you kind of fast forward to today. And this was actually a study that was done by Morgan Stanley. And they actually predicted that we'd hit 10 billion in 2012. And what actually happened was we actually hit 10 billion, by the end of 2010. So, it kind of shows you, the amazing, I guess, growth that's happening right now. And with growth, there's a tremendous opportunity. So you definitely want to be there with mobile. But when I say mobile, what does it actually mean? Because everybody, mobile means something different to different people. So, like some people, mobile is just a website with a .m domain, right? Something that, kind of fits in, the constraints of the screen. And then, for other people, it means like a native mobile app, right? Something that actually runs on your device, it runs offline. And then, you get into, the question of, is it, like, do you build it native? Do you build it with web technologies? Do you go hybrid, right? So basically what we're looking at for enterprise most likely is probably sort of like your native style app. So something that gives you access to the native functionality on your device. So something that can, leverage, your PIM contacts, your GPS, all that kind of stuff, accessing your camera, so you can do like augmented reality type apps, right? So these are the things that, enterprise is usually more interested in. So the goals of mobile. So for me, I kind of picked these three. There's lots of goals, but these are kind of my top three. Basically, if you're going mobile, you basically want to provide services through multiple channels. And by multiple channels, I mean, different devices, different platforms, right? And the second thing is you want to find new ways to provide services. So you don't want to just take your desktop site and just, kind of port it over, one-to-one, because it's a totally different experience when you're going from desktop to mobile. Because, desktop, people have more time to, kind of sit in front of their laptop or their computer, right? And, like the attention span is a lot different. And also, like the way they kind of interact, right? They have a mouse, they can do mouse overs and things like that. So when you go to mobile, obviously you can't do that kind of stuff. And, like from all the keynote sessions this morning, you heard, like people are on the go. So there's this whole idea of, like I only have, like maybe 5 seconds to glance at my mobile device. So when you're actually, like in a hurry and you need focus, right? Like I just need to access my information. I need to do something and, get on with my life, right? I can't be, going to the, the nav bar, pulling pull-down menus and, like navigating a site menu to, get where I want to. So you got to make all that stuff, quickly accessible for people. So that's kind of what I mean by new actions, finding new ways, better ways that, people can use your service. So probably the best example there is like a flight booking application, right? So, you can book your flights, you can search for flights on a desktop, right? And you can port that over, to mobile. That's fairly easy to do. But you can actually add new actions like, notifying me when there's a gate change or if there's a flight cancellation. So that's something that you probably wouldn't really, do for desktop, right? Because, mobile, makes sense because, like I'm on the run and, oh, okay, yeah, I got to go to another gate, right? So it's, that idea of finding new actions. And also, like if you're looking at, like, let's say, like a restaurant website, right? A lot of times, you'll see, like, lots of images of, the food that they have, like their menu, right? And then if you're actually just looking for the location is usually a link that's buried at the bottom or, somewhere in the corner, right? It's not kind of up front and center. But when you're mobile, right, like if you're going to that, restaurant's, app, right, first thing you want to do is, like basically find out, where the heck are they, right? Because I'm mobile, so that's mainly what I'm interested in. So you kind of change the focus from showing a menu to, showing like location or phone number information, like contact. Like I'm lost, okay, how do I get there? Or I just want to make a reservation, right? So that's kind of the idea. And ultimately, it's about making people's lives easier. So, the idea that, the phone is more personal than desktop, needs to be simpler in focus, and consuming information in smaller chunks. So, like, if I'm looking at, like, let's say, my flight history, like all the flights that I booked, like, I don't need to see that when I'm mobile, right? I don't really care, like I took 10 trips or whatever, right? That stuff can stay kind of on the desktop version. For the mobile version, just give me, just smaller chunks of information that, might be, consolidated from different sources, right? So, like the idea of, the flight cancellations and stuff like that. So you kind of get that data from somewhere else and you kind of merge it, just kind of give me what's relevant. Okay, so when we're talking about, I guess, mobile for the enterprise, I always find that it's really helpful to look at the, I guess, the benefits from the enterprise standpoint. Because when you're actually building the app, basically you have to kind of sell the app, to management, right? So, access, that means, access to, corporate information, anywhere, anytime. Cost savings, because like these devices are a lot cheaper than a desktop PC. So if you can put, one of these in the hands of, all your employees, right? These things are, what, $200-300 as opposed to a couple thousand for a laptop or whatever, right? So there's definitely some cost savings there. Accuracy. So this is kind of a neat idea because, a lot of companies, they still use like manual, paper forms. People fill out forms. Let's take like property management, for example. Somebody will go out, do building inspections. They'll check off a checklist on their clipboard. It's all paper-based or something like that. Then they'll go back to the office and, somebody has to type that in, right? So wouldn't it be great, if, they could just, take their tablet, take a picture of, like areas that, might be defective that need, some repair or something like that. They can quickly, select things, tap it in, and submit right away. So that's where you gain accuracy, right? And then, that kind of leads over into productivity. So, because people can kind of do their work, They don't have to go back to the office, use the computer, do all this administrative stuff. They can get on and, do more inspections, right? So it makes them more productive. And, by making them more productive, it makes the company more responsive, if there's any, I guess, changes, that they have to react, clients that, need a little more attention. So, you can kind of, respond to customers better. You can anticipate their needs better because you have more time, more resources, right? And then there's control. So this is, your IT policies. So, I can control, who has access to what information, corporate data. And, that's really important for corporate libel. Right, so all that kind of translates into effectiveness, efficiency, and convenience, right, for the enterprise. So when I'm kind of like building an app or redesigning, like some web app or, like a web page app and redesigning for mobile, I kind of keep these things in mind, like, how can I address these things? So that's kind of my starting point. Okay, so let's take a look at the capabilities. So most of you guys probably already know a lot of this stuff. I just kind of want to, just kind of flesh it out again. But this is kind of how I feel when I first went from desktop to mobile web. You kind of start off with that, a nice 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, right? It's fairly standard. You can kind of do anything with it. It's this kind of huge canvas. You can draw a lot on it. You can kind of do great things. And then when you get to mobile, right, you get that, small constraint of, screen size, the processors, kind of suck and stuff like that. So it gets kind of frustrating. So, you kind of end up crumpling that nice sheet of paper, right? And, you just end up tossing it. So, but I actually believe that, mobile can actually be like this nice origami airplane, right? If you fold it properly, do the right things, you can actually make it, more elegant and actually more functional than that original piece of paper, right? I can actually take that airplane and I can actually throw it further than I can throw that piece of paper. Okay, so, your mobile device, it has, an accelerometer, it's got GPS to tell you where I am. You got a digital compass, so, now, I'm holding my phone, it actually knows which direction I'm facing. So if I'm looking for directions, it can actually, give me like an augmented reality view, and it can kind of point me in the right direction. You've got like multi-touch sensors. You've got dual cameras, front and back. You got Bluetooth, NFC. You got ambient light sensor, so, it knows when it's light and dark. Right, so, with all, those capabilities, right, you can now, kind of create more compelling apps, right, that, that you couldn't really do on a desktop, right? So I can do, nice gestures now. And one example that I saw that was kind of really neat of an app was kind of like, this was for the London Tube. So they actually created this application where instead of going to the website, trying to find the link for all the different maps, and then actually drilling down and saying, I want to find, this route to that route, they actually, it actually already knows where I am. So right away, it pinpoints me, and it can actually show me all the stops in that area. And then I can actually kind of hold this thing and kind of point it in a certain direction. And it actually knows that, oh, okay, there's a stop behind me. So on the screen, what it does is it actually draws the arrow saying, hey, there's, a bus stop right behind you. Just walk, 2 kilometers that way or whatever, right? So you can do a lot of neat things that you can't do on the desktop. So something to definitely think about here. And then, of course, we have the dreaded constraints. So, of course, you've got the viewport size, interface, right? So, we don't have, well, other, I guess, devices don't really have a keyboard, well, at least a nice keyboard like ours. You don't really have a mouse. You have touch. So, different ergonomic factors there. The specs, this is definitely not like a desktop processor. The memory is definitely a little more limited on these things. So you can't, kind of write this huge, jQuery mobile app or, something in Touch and, hope it runs on, like a little torch or older bolt or something like that. So, and the other thing is connectivity, right? So depending on where you are, your connection's going to drop. The speed isn't going to be reliable, right? So if you're actually, going to transfer like all these map tiles, like let's say, you got an area and, you have to transfer, like 6 tiles or whatever, right? So you might get, the first 3, and then, the next one might come in later, right? So, it kind of, ruins the experience, right? So you kind of have to, account for that. So, yeah, so let's take a look at, kind of the landscape for just, some of the different BB6 devices, BB7, Playbook, and BB10. So you can see, the screen specs, vary right across the board. Processor varies, all the way from 1.2 gigahertz all the way back. RAM, you got to account for 512 megs. And when you're talking about WebWorks apps, like the way the memory is allocated, the browser actually gets half the device memory, and then a WebWorks app gets half of what the browser gets, right? So in this case, the 9330, right? So you get 256 for the browser, and then you get 128 for your WebWorks app. That's what you're left with, right? So if if you're loading in all these libraries and you're not even using half of them, and let's say you're using Google Maps, you're using jQuery, jQuery Mobile, right? Like you can eat up half your RAM right there, and then you don't have too much left for your own app. Okay, and then the bottom rows there, you can see all the different devices. Some have touch, right? Some don't. So obviously the older ones don't have touch, right? But if you want to write an application that supports everything across the board, this is quite a daunting task. So we actually had this problem, a client that we were building an application for is for Real Clear Politics. And we actually wanted to support some older phones, so we actually had to provide trackpad support. So we actually found some libraries that could allow you to do nice scrolling, but then we had to figure out, okay, now we have to augment or modify those libraries so that we could actually use the trackpad, because some of the older phones actually don't have touch screens. So they had all these list views and stuff like that where you're looking at news, but yeah, you can't scroll it. So that was a little bit challenging. And then you have some of the newer devices that actually don't have trackpads, and then you have some that actually have trackpads and they also have touch. Right. So, but the interesting thing is, a lot of libraries, what they'll do is they'll do like feature detection. So they'll say, oh, okay, if you have touch support, then I'm not going to enable the click stuff for you. But in the case of the Torch 9860, you actually might get a user who actually prefers to use the trackpad instead of the touch. So how do you enable both? Right. So that's something you have to consider when you're writing your own frameworks. So you want to be able to bind those extra events in there. And keyboard, right? So pretty much, all our devices have keyboards, and even I guess the playbook and Dev Alpha, because you can hook up a Bluetooth keyboard, right? So just because it's mainly a touch device, it doesn't mean you don't want to support keyboard or mouse, because eventually if we get like docking stations, right, where you can actually get like a Bluetooth mouse, then you can actually support mouse overs. So it's kind of this this convergence of desktop and mobile again. So before, we were kind of splitting off into two, and then now I'm actually seeing everything kind of converging back. So you actually have to support both. Before we kind of made the decision, oh, okay, if it's mobile, we can kind of branch out this way. Desktop will branch out that way. But yeah, now you got to start thinking, okay, how do we write it once to actually truly support everything across the board? And the other thing you have to look at is obviously is the HTML5 features, right? So if you look at the scores, like obviously, yeah, our Dev Alpha is just off the charts. It's better than like Chrome's desktop browser. Playbook's pretty decent, and then yeah, some of the other ones, yeah, they're a little bit lagging in terms of functionality. So you kind of have to look at your app and see, what features do you actually need. So if you actually go to HTML5 test, you can kind of, figure that out. I'll actually give you a URL to another site that you can actually see or compare the features. And it's actually this one here. You can go to CanIUsecom. So this is actually a pretty good site here. You can actually pick, they actually have categories that you can pick. So let's say you're doing like CSS3, DOM manipulation, HTML5. So you can kind of check off those, and you can pick off your browsers that you want to support. So here I've checked off BlackBerry Browser 10 and BlackBerry Browser 7. And you can kind of see there's partial support here for get compute style, navigation timing APIs and stuff like that. So if I kind of see that stuff in advance, I can kind of plan ahead. Okay, I'll have to write something to handle that. And, especially if you're planning, like, doing estimates, like budget estimates or time estimates, right? You can say, okay, yeah, we're going to have to address this area, right? So this should definitely help. Any questions so far? It's pretty quiet. Yeah, if you have any questions, just pop up your hand. Try to make this a little more interactive. So I guess this is kind of what we're looking at when we're trying to kind of address these two different platforms. So we have kind of like all these older smartphones. We have our current smartphones. So the older ones we actually have probably out in the field, there's still BlackBerry 4, 5, 6, and our current ones are 7. And then we're moving to basically BB10, and Playbook's kind of somewhere in the middle. So BlackBerry WebWorks is kind of this kind of like bridging technology. So you can actually write it in HTML5 technology and actually compile it to the two different platforms. So you can actually compile it back to Java and COD files for the actual smartphones, and you can actually compile it kind of forward, so using Adobe Air currently technologies for the container for the playbook, and for BB10 it's actually going to be like native C container, so that's the way that's going to work. So here's kind of how I kind of view, I guess, the trade-offs between the different development approaches. So you can definitely write a native app, and it's going to have the best user experience. It's probably going to be the highest user experience you can get. But the problem is the cost and time to market it's the longest, right? It's going to take the longest to write, and you're going to have to write it, probably 3 or 4 times, right? One for iOS, one for Android, one for BlackBerry, one for Windows Mobile, and whoever else you want to write for. Right, so that's definitely not a good option. So that's why I think a lot of people or a lot of companies are going towards mobile web technologies. So you can, kind of do the quick thing. You can just create a mobile website, just an m.subdomain, just use jQuery mobile or something like that. And, you get like a nice UI very quickly. But the problem is now you don't have all this native functionality, right? You can't access, like contacts and emails and stuff like that, right? You can't get, that native experience. So what you can do is the easy route is to kind of take your website, take all that stuff and package it in a web container, right? And then you have a quick web app, or, you just add it to your home screen, and, that kind of gives you that kind of web app type feel. Probably the better solution I would recommend, this is what we usually recommend, is this hybrid approach. So you kind of use the HTML5 technology, so you kind of get that, quick to market, I guess, benefit. And you get a user experience that's fairly close to native, right? So that's kind of why we kind of aim for that way. But it basically really depends on, like what your requirements are. Like if you're doing a game, then yeah, you want a native app because, yeah, you need that performance, right? Or, if you're even doing, like specialty stuff, like where you want to do your own encryption, then yeah, you definitely want to go native. But with hybrid, you could actually, do like native C++ extensions, and then, kind of build like the web layer on top of that. Right, so there's a lot of choices there in how you architect this. Okay, and this is our migration strategy. So we kind of recognize that there's a lot of enterprises out there that still have J2ME apps out there. So what we typically do is we'll actually go out in the field. Typically what we'll do is, we'll kind of stay for a week, and we'll basically help you kind of start porting your app over, basically from J2ME to WebWorks. And usually the way we start, usually the Java UI usually takes the longest because, it's usually about 80% of the work. Porting the classes is about 20%. And the problem with, the Java UI, if anybody's, already done Java development, right, you have to develop one for, the torch, one for the bold, right? So it gets kind of painful. So, that was actually, almost doing like native development for every single device. Right, so the first strategy, or the first step there, is to basically migrate everything over to WebWorks, right? So you basically turn everything into a web UI. And because the Java UI is so different from web UI, you basically have to start from scratch there. It's not like, you might be able to take a few assets, like image assets over, but basically all the markup you're going to have to rewrite, and, you have to basically throw away most of that Java code. And then the classes, what you can do is you can kind of look at the functionality, and then what you do is you basically look at our WebWorks API documentation and basically try to find that kind of matching method, and then you kind of use that. And then basically whatever's kind of left over, then you have to write as a custom Java extension. So that's for the current version of WebWorks. That's basically to support Playbook. And then I guess the next strategy, if you want to go to BB10. So basically you don't have to jump straight from Java to BB10. You can kind of do this intermediate thing. And because BB10's not quite ready yet, you can kind of go to this intermediate stage first, get everything working. And then basically when you actually go to BB10, pretty much all the web UI, the WebWorks APIs, those should port over fairly easily. There's a couple things you have to change, but it's pretty minimal. And then the thing that you will have to change is you have to basically rewrite those extensions that you wrote in Java or Adobe Air, and you'll have to rewrite those for the QNX. You have to write them in C, C++. Okay, so here's my favorite topic, frameworks and libraries. So there's quite a few there's probably quite a few hundred libraries out there, and it's pretty difficult to kind of choose. Like the big ones that people usually go for are like CentraTouch, jQuery Mobile, Dojo, stuff like that, right? But the problem is I consider those like macro frameworks. That they're very heavy, you know, and they were kind of developed at a different time. Like a lot of them were developed for desktop, right? So you know they have all that legacy support for IE6, IE7, and you know all these different browsers, Firefox. But the nice thing about you know like our devices is everything is WebKit based. So you only basically have to worry about WebKit. You don't have to worry about IE6 and Firefox, you know, and all the different differences between them. So there's a lot of different micro frameworks out there that now that actually focus mainly on WebKit, right? So you know as soon as you kind of drop all that legacy code, it really lightens the library a lot, right? So that's kind of what I recommend is people kind of look at micro frameworks, because with micro frameworks what you can do is you can actually build your own framework from the micro frameworks. And then there's something in between what I call meso frameworks. So these are kind of like something that's a little bit bigger than micro frameworks. So, you know, they provide a lot more functionality, you know, like common things, but they're not as big as the macro frameworks. So you could actually use some of those meso frameworks on, like, you know, BB7. You might struggle a little running them on BB6. So we kind of categorize those ones in the meso frameworks. And then I kind of layered that on top of JavaScript libraries, right? So you can kind of start out with one of the frameworks, and then you kind of add libraries as you need, okay? And then, of course, you know, you have your own HTML5, CSS3 JavaScript code underneath, which kind of acts as a glue between everything. And then, of course, you know, you have the choice between all the different containers. You know, obviously, we want you to look at WebWorks. But yeah, if you want to develop for other platforms like iOS or Android, then yeah, definitely take a look at Cordova, or I guess it used to be called PhoneGap. IBM WorkLite is another solution, which is actually based on PhoneGap. And then there's also Row Mobile and AppCellerator Titanium. Okay, so here's just kind of a quick snapshot of how I kind of approach, I guess, the decision-making process. So I kind of create kind of these layers, or kind of functionality. So basically, if I'm looking for like a DOM library, right, you can choose from jQuery. That's kind of like the grandfather, or the de facto standard out there for DOM manipulation. If you want something a little lighter, you can use XUI. That was actually developed by the guys that developed PhoneGap. And the one that I kind of prefer is actually Zepto.js. That library is actually only 5K, and it's actually jQuery compatible. So if all your developers are used to the jQuery syntax with the $sign and all the nice selector stuff, then yeah, Zepto actually has the same syntax. It's not 100% like jQuery, so that there are slight differences, but that'll get you pretty far. So if you kind of start with that for DOM manipulation, right, that's pretty good. And then probably the hardest choice is probably the UI framework, right? So here you have CentraTouch, jQuery Mobile as kind of the macro ones that everybody really likes. And it's I'm not saying don't choose those ones. I'm saying if you do choose them, basically it has to become like, I guess, a religion, or you have to really be devoted to those I guess frameworks. You really have to learn them inside out. So I wouldn't like just tell your developers just take a week and learn it. I'd actually probably send them on a course. So they actually really understand it inside out. Because if they actually need to extend it, typically, what a lot of people do is, they'll write their own JavaScript code on top of it. They'll try to, override some of the events or something like that, or override some of the objects and classes, and you end up fighting the framework at that point. So, like if it's doing like a touch event thing, and I want to kind of override that behavior with something else, so I've got actually something else watching it. So, I wait for it to, kind of do the event, and then what I do is cancel what it does, then that's kind of wrong. You don't want to do stuff like that, right? So in that case, you might want to look at some of the other frameworks. So if basically what you do is, what I like to do is I go to the kitchen sink examples, and I kind of look through, I guess, their catalog of all the features that they have. And if it meets pretty much all my requirements, then I'll actually go that route. But if I find I'm actually only like using one or like maybe 5 features out of it, then yeah, it's kind of a waste, right? So then yeah, take a look at some of these other ones. DHTML5 Touch, that's actually very similar to CentraTouch in terms of like coding style. Like it's very object oriented, whereas something like jQuery Mobile is markup based. So, if your organization has a lot of designers, right, you might want to go the jQuery mobile site. And, if you have a lot of Java developers who, do a lot of the design work as well, then, yeah, go Such a Touch, because they'll feel at home with all the objects there. So some other ones that you can look at are Cookstew. That's actually, I guess, a German term. There's Ember. And then there's Dojo Mobile. Dojo's been around for a while, so it's very stable. And they have a mobile version. There's Enyo. This is actually the old WebOS project. And it's actually still around, believe it or not. And it's got some really neat stuff in there. So it's kind of a lighter version of Such a Touch, I think. So, but it's got a nice interface. It's got cool sliding effects and stuff like that. They almost have this similar thing like our Peak that you guys have seen with our BB10 stuff. But where I usually like to start is I like to start with the micro frameworks. So my favorite over there is Twitter Bootstrap. So I really like Bootstrap because it doesn't kind of force me to actually use JavaScript. Like I don't have to, it actually comes with JavaScript plugins, right? So you can get things like modal dialog boxes. They've got, tab bars, right? They've got all those standard controls. But if I'm just creating a very simple application, I don't actually have to use that stuff. So I don't have to include those libraries, right? So I can actually just start off with just straight CSS, which is just 2 CSS files. And I think they amount to something like 50K, right? So I can get, really nice looking widgets, nice form controls, right? And then as I kind of see fit, like, if you start adding functionality, then you can actually include those plugins, right? And the nice thing is Bootstrap works really well with other libraries. So I've actually used it with like iScroll for doing, the kinetic scrolling. I've used it with the leaflet maps, right? Because sometimes like what you'll want to do is you want to kind of mix and match. And if you're doing kind of this MVC kind of style of coding, I don't know a lot of organizations that are doing that. But yeah, those are kind of the popular ones out there. Backbone is probably the most popular out there. And it's actually based on jQuery. So if you're kind of using jQuery, you may want to use Backbone. So this is the kind of the trick, you got to find the right combinations. But if you kind of narrow it down into, these kind of like what we call swim lanes, or this is like different recipes, then yeah, it should definitely help you. Charting, I like Raphael. It's actually based on SVG. And then there's HighCharts, which is kind of a heavier JavaScript library. But if you're doing a lot of like stock charts and stuff like that, HighCharts is pretty good. If you're developing something for BB10 or the playbook and you really want a lot of rich graphics, then yeah, look at D3 or processing. And then there's Google Charts and maps. So this is kind of my specialty here. I actually used to work at the Weather Network, so I did a lot of maps there. And we used to use Bing Maps. We actually tried Google, but yeah, it kind of got in our way, and it's very heavy. I've got some slides later. I'll show you a comparison on all those. But the one that I kind of like there is Leaflet. So it's actually designed for WebKit-based browsers only. And it's actually a really lightweight library. And you can actually choose the mapping provider. So I can actually use Google's tiles, or I can use Bing's tiles, or I can use my own tiles. So if I generate my own tiles, I can use my own tile server. And the neat thing is you can actually switch between all three of them. So, if, let's say, you don't want to renew your enterprise license with Bing or something like that, or, you have some disagreement with them, right? So from an enterprise standpoint, you want to be able to, easily switch between mapping providers. So, but basically you just write your code in Leaflet, and then it's just one line to change your provider. So from an enterprise standpoint, that's pretty important. And, even, I guess the other thing is downtime. Like let's say Bing Maps have actually, gone down a few times. So, like we've been, using it for our weather animation and radar. And a couple times, their site has gone down, and, we've been down for, like 4 hours or whatever. So, something like that, it'd be nice to be able to switch to another provider. So it's kind of a backup. And, I can keep going on and on. I actually have like this huge spreadsheet. So, there's libraries for doing touch events, libraries for doing storage. So that's kind of how I look at it. So I just kind of wanted to give you a snapshot there. So hopefully it gives you a good template to start with. Any questions so far? Just curious, what do you guys mostly use for libraries out there, or frameworks? Any jQuery people here? Do you? Yeah. Yeah, I don't mind jQuery. It's once you put like jQuery mobile on top. You know, it's kind of like the mobile version of jQuery UI. It's like, why is the mobile version heavier than the desktop version? Anybody using Sencha? Sencha Touch? Dojo? No. Oh, a little bit of Dojo. Okay. Okay, responsive design. So I guess kind of where this comes about is, I guess the history is you had graceful degradation versus progressive enhancement. So back in the old days of web development, we used to do this thing called graceful degradation. So, you know, you'd basically, I think, what we had at the time, like Firefox browsers, right? So you'd basically develop for Firefox, I forget what version it was, like 5 or something like that. And then basically you'd, you know, kind of gracefully degrade if your browser was IE6, right? So you'd do, you know, all this, you know, weird detection, you know, feature detection stuff, you know, user agent string matching, and, you know, basically you kind of, but the problem with graceful degradation is basically what you're doing is you're basically, you know, kind of putting your stake in the ground and you're saying, you know, I'm basically supporting the browsers from this point back. But as new browsers come out, you're kind of stuck, right? You can't support new browsers easily with that graceful degradation approach. So what they came up with was the idea of progressive enhancement. So basically you start from the oldest, and then you kind of add features as, you know, the browser kind of supports it, right? And that's probably the better approach because, you know, you can kind of, like usually like when you start development, you'll say, okay, right now I want to support Google Chrome 21 or whatever it is, right? But, you know, Google's going to keep, you know, adding browsers, right? So it's a lot easier to kind of add features to newer browsers, right? As, you know, like IE comes out with IE 11, right? I can add support for that. You know, it's a lot easier to do that than to go the other way. And I think this is kind of where responsive design kind of came from, this progressive enhancement approach. So it's kind of it's a little bit different because it's kind of a design principle, I guess. So it's a way of making websites that work on desktop browsers and mobile devices, right? And how you do that is basically you kind of detect basically what device you're on using CSS media queries, right? So you can do that, and then it's not just a matter of, you know, kind of, you know, squashing things down or, you know, rescaling things. What you actually want to do is you actually want to change the actual flow. Like you actually want to move elements around. And I've got a good slide here. So that's got a little bit blurry. But yeah, basically the desktop browser there, you can kind of see, you know, the very, you've got the navigation elements on the side. You got your header and your content area, right? But you can't take that and easily shove it onto a small phone. So what you need to do is actually kind of stack everything, stack all your divs. So you kind of have your header at the top, and then, you know, you can have like, you know, a little button to expand the menu or drop down to the bottom or something like that. So basically what you're doing is you're rearranging, and we call this adaptive layouts. And then there's also this idea of fluid layouts. So, you know, if your screen supports the size, right, you know, you can go all the way across. And you basically try to fit things, and, you know, as you kind of get smaller and smaller, you kind of push things down. So that's the idea with fluid layouts. And I provided a few links for you to kind of look at. This actually, the fluid layouts, I think there's some other ones fixed. Yeah, there's about 3 other layouts. If you go to the lukew.com site, there's a couple resources there. 2 other really good sites are Mobile Patterns, Mobile Design Pattern Gallery. So it kind of gives you kind of some samples. You know, like you have the list view, you know, you kind of tap it, you go to the next page, you know, the whole page scrolls over. Okay, so I'm just going to provide a kind of a simple example here. So, you know, if you have a device that's, you know, 480 pixels, what you do is, you know, I've got panel 1, the blue one there, and basically panel 2, I just push to the bottom. Anything bigger than that, you know, I'll give you a side nav and then the content area. And the code for that, really simple. So on the left-hand side there, that's basically your regular CSS. And with media queries, that's actually considered the first media query. So for browsers that actually don't support media queries, that's kind of the default. So usually what I'll do is, you know, I'll put, so that one there is actually the 480 pixel one, right? So for browsers that don't support it, right away, that's what you get. You kind of get the small site. And then what you can do is you can do the @media screen, and then I can say if the minimum width is 480 pixel, so basically anything bigger than that, then I'm actually going to use CSS and just kind of override or add to some of the other settings there. So you can see here, basically, if I have a bigger screen, I'm going to increase the font size to actually make it more readable. So I'm actually going to go from 10 points to 14 points. And then the panel, I'm actually going to, instead of 100%, I'm going to make it 20%. And I'm going to actually make the height 480 pixels and float it left. Right? So this is how easy it is to kind of do this. And I kind of want to show you, you don't have to rewrite. Like, these aren't like separate CSS files. Like, you don't have one for desktop, one for mobile, and then you duplicate both and then adjust them. Because CSS is cascading. So I can kind of set the font family in kind of like the base CSS there. And that will actually cascade down into the other ones if it's not defined there. Sorry. So it just makes it a little bit easier because basically for certain screen sizes, basically I'm just putting in the differences, right? I'm not actually repeating all those other properties over there. Okay. So it makes it a little bit easier, and then basically this is kind of where the idea of I guess the progressive enhancement comes. So basically, like, let's say our new BB10 Dev Alpha comes out. So I want to be able to support that phone. So all it is just another media query, right? I just have to add support for that screen size. But yeah, when you actually do your screen size, you have to kind of be a little bit careful because you don't want to just say anything bigger than this, because like when Dev Alpha comes out, or BB10, it's 1280 by 768 or something like that. Right, so if you said, use this for, anything bigger, right, you might get, like this kind of behavior that's unexpected. So just kind of think about how you do your, because what you might have to do is actually combine the expressions there. So you have a minimum width, and you might want to set a maximum width. So don't just say, anything bigger than 480 pixels, right? Anything bigger than 480 pixels, but a maximum width of, let's say, 1024. So then you can kind of constrain that for like a tablet or something like that, or, like a portrait mode or something like that. And then that way you still have room for future growth, okay? Always try to think ahead. Okay, how am I doing for time here? Okay, doing pretty good. Okay, so here's a couple tips. So when you're looking at graphics, what are your choices for HTML5? So you can do CSS3. That's probably my favorite because it's actually hardware accelerated on all our devices. So you can do transforms, transitions, animations. And it's very lightweight compared to something like WebGL, right? WebGL basically, yeah, you need Playbook or BB10 for that to work. And the problem is WebGL doesn't work on other platforms. Too bad. So basically, yeah, if you want to write games or something like that, yeah, you're not going to be able to port that over to other platforms like Android or iOS. And then you can also use Canvas, but I think on other platforms it's not hardware accelerated. On our platform it is. So yeah, so you got to watch that experience. And then there's also SVG. So I like Raphael as a library. It's very lightweight. So you can kind of see a theme here. I'm all about lightweight. May not look it, but. And actually, there's a list of CSS libraries there. So Alice.js is one that I actually helped develop. It's actually on our GitHub page, blackberry.github.com/Alice. So you can check that out and kind of use it. It's actually designed to be really easy to use. It's just one line of code. So basically, you just specify a list of elements that you want to animate. Just set a whole bunch of properties and animate away. That's it. You don't have to, write a lot of complex CSS to actually do it. So Alice actually tries to make all that stuff a lot easier for you. It auto-generates all that CSS. And then there's other libraries that are kind of similar. They kind of take this kind of, I guess, more like a Flash type approach. So they kind of use like a tweening library. So basically you go from frame to frame to frame. Flux Slider is kind of a specialty one. It's actually basically designed for doing like slideshow galleries. So just basically animating images, and it does a really great job on that. The only problem is if you want to animate between actual like forms, let's say, you can't animate a form or like just regular div content. So it's a little bit limited. So it's a very specialized library there. But yeah, if you're definitely displaying graphic or photos, yeah, that's the one to use there. Okay, anybody doing any maps in their applications right now? No, one. Okay. Which library do you use? Google. Okay. Yeah. So I actually did a lot of research on this, and you can see Google is actually the heaviest. So if you look at the middle column there, the amount of kilobytes transferred. This is actually for just a simple web page that's 1024 by 768, and it transfers almost a megabyte of data. So that's a lot. But if you look at Microsoft Bing Maps, it's almost half of that. So which is really great. If you look at the script size, there's not a lot of differences. But yeah, MapQuest does a really good job. Their script is like only 46K, but their images are really high. So Microsoft's tiles are, I guess, better compressed. So they're half the size of Google's. Right? And if you look at the requests there, it's kind of interesting. Like there's a lot more, I guess, files being sent down with Google. So kind of an interesting thing anyways. But here's something that a lot of people don't really look at is there's actually open source map APIs out there. So they're not those hosted solutions like Google Maps or Bing Maps or MapQuest. These are just kind of like standalone libraries, and you kind of use, like, I guess, those other tile providers. So I looked at Modest Maps, which is really cool. Like, if you look at the library size, it's, like 40K compared to Google's 105. And it actually has that kind of like bootstrap approach. So you can kind of start off with like the core library, and as you kind of need extra functionality. So if you need to draw polygons or do push mark, I guess markers on there, you can actually include those script files. So you basically only pull in what you need. And I really like that approach. And Leaflet is fairly similar. Its library is a little bit bigger, but I actually find it the most functional. And kind of ignore the version number. It's like 0.3, but yeah, it's production ready. And there's another one called Open Layers. This one's a little bit different because what it does is actually, it's a layer that sits on top of the other mapping providers. So if you actually want to use Google Maps, you actually have to pull in Google Maps SDK, and then Open Layer sits on top of that. And the reason they did that, well, originally was because they wanted to be able to switch between mapping providers as well. But yeah, they didn't want to have to kind of rewrite everything. So yeah, they just kind of put their stuff on top of the other providers. But the problem with that is when they wrote their code, like it's tied to a very specific version of Google. So at the time, like it was Google 2. But then when Google released a new version, then you had to wait for an update from Open Layers to support those new mapping features. So they were kind of always one step behind. But it's another option. I think they're more kind of like GIS oriented. So if you're looking for something that's very GIS-like, then Open Layers is kind of good. But if you just want to display a map, put some markers on it, then yeah, look at some of the other two there. Definitely Leaflet. Okay, and this is kind of the neat feature. So this is the whole idea of mixing and matching. So what I can do is I can take the Leaflet, and I can actually use Google's tiles, and then you can kind of see like where I'm at there. Or I can switch out Google, and I can put in Nokia, and Nokia's tiles are actually smaller than Google's, right? And they look fairly decent. So yeah, that's an option there. So if you're really looking at like basically, I guess it's almost like a diet, right? Basically, I guess if you only have like I don't know like 2,000 calories a day, right? And I can kind of pick that one, that one, and that one, and it's like, okay, great. I kind of reached that point, and I got to stop there, or kind of reach the limit. So you can kind of see the smallest one there is Modest Maps and Bing Maps. I find Modest Maps is a little too modest. Like it's very basic, like what you get. So yeah, I don't mind kind of upping or upsizing, I guess, the Leaflet there. Okay, so some tips for user experience. This whole idea of less is more. A lot of times when people design frameworks or like UI frameworks, what they want to do is they want to try to emulate like the native controls. So if you look at Sencha Touch, it tries to basically emulate all the iOS controls, right? And when they do that, like it looks great, but there's a lot of overhead on top of that, right? Just for nice rounded edges, or like a control bar at the bottom fixed bar, stuff like that, right? So what I like to do is just use the controls that are available to you in HTML5, right? So it's got a lot of new input types. So you've got phone, email, you've got search types, right? So just try and use the stuff that's already there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. And this whole idea of, I guess, the one eyeball, one thumb. If you kind of remember that you're designing for somebody who's on the move, right? It's going to change how you design your interface and what kind of data you provide on the screen, right? Because basically you want everything to be very focused, right? Everything's got to be like 2 or 3 clicks away. If it's any more than that, then yeah, you're doing it wrong. And also keep in mind like the viewing distance, right? Because a lot of people kind of get used to developing on the desktop, they'll test on the desktop, and you got like usually about like 25 inches, and then when you go to a laptop, you might be a little bit closer, and mobile devices, people, usually have the device right here, right? So it's kind of a different user experience. It's more personal. It's like right there, okay? Okay. Yeah, and as I said, like, yeah, don't try to emulate native controls, right? Just, it's web technologies. It's web technologies. Just let it be web. And when you're talking about form fields, try to pre-populate the fields as much. Like if there's a login form, try and save the username. If it's a location, instead of asking the person to pick their country, province, and city, you've got GPS on this, and you should be able to pre-populate that for them. You should be able to pre-pick it, and then if it's wrong, then they can go in and change it. So just try and do little things like that just to make it easier for them. And also tap areas. So a lot of times when people develop and they make controls for mobile, they tend to think it's too big, but then you have to remember that people have fat fingers and they're trying to tap on these things, right? So you have to make sure that it's 44 by 44 pixels for tap areas, and if it's something that they don't really need to tap that much, you can usually get away with like 32 by 32 pixels, right? So if you're kind of crammed for space, and also kind of worry about or consider the spacing between everything. So you don't want two buttons too close together, right? So you've probably seen this with a lot of mobile apps where they have banner ads in them, and like they put the bottom nav bar right above that, and sometimes what you do is you try and tap that and you accidentally hit the stupid banner ad, and then you get launched somewhere else. You have to wait for the browser, and then you have to go back, and it just interrupts your whole experience. So just kind of be cognizant of like the spacing as well, because that's very important. And I think I know Apple has some UI guidelines on mobile as well, but I heard that Windows actually has probably the best UI guidelines. I didn't get a chance to actually find the link for you, but yeah, I'll try and find that. If you want to ping me offline, I can send it to you. Okay, a couple of performance tips here. So basically, you want your app to be able to be used offline. That's the whole point of being mobile. So you can use things like local storage and a manifest file to basically cache those files. The other thing, too, that a lot of people forget is CSS selectors. So, a lot of times what they'll do is you might want to put a style on it, like a div tag, but, you got to remember that, that's kind of a universal tag, so it's not very specific. So the more specific you can be with your CSS selectors, it's a lot faster. So try to use IDs as much as possible because they're more efficient. And if you're actually just creating like a 2D app, like you're not doing any sort of 3D stuff, you can actually trigger hardware acceleration, and that will actually make the browser actually render 2D stuff faster. So that's kind of a neat trick. If you're interested in that, I can actually show you some code for that. The other thing, too, is use lazy loading if you can. So let's say like you're creating an app that has like a map in the tab, but the map isn't coming up right away. What you can do is wait till the user actually taps on the map. Then you can actually go and load the mapping library for Google. So that way you're not trying to pull in like a megabyte worth of library files if you're only displaying a login form right at the beginning. So just kind of load stuff as you need it. And I guess the other one, this one's a little trickier. It's minimize reflows and repaints. So on the desktop, this isn't a big deal, right? Basically, reflows and repaints happen like anytime you change the DOM or you kind of insert something into the DOM. And if you start changing styles on the fly, that will actually cause a reflow. So if you can kind of minimize, I guess, those things, then yeah, the whole screen doesn't have to repaint. What you're doing is basically you want to target a certain area and just repaint that one area. So instead of repainting the whole screen and getting that flicker, which kind of ruins the experience, just kind of target your changes as much as possible. Okay, and I guess this is for the connectivity stuff. So if you can, try to use push. So like a lot of the smartphones have BlackBerry push. Okay. Or if you can't use push, so if you're developing something for a playbook, then you can use something called long polling instead of using poll, because like let's say this is a notification app. So instead of hitting the server like every 5 seconds, like every time you do that, what it does is it actually transmits. And if you're far away from I guess the cell tower, it's going to chew up a lot of your battery, because I think it's like 1.5 watts to actually transmit. So if it's constantly doing this every 5 seconds, right, you're killing your battery. And if you're really in a remote location, it's got to transmit a lot more to try and reach that tower, right? So if you can kind of use push, then basically what you're doing is the device is only just listening. It doesn't have to transmit. So it's using I think 100 times less power, right? So that's really important with mobile devices, right? You got limited battery. You don't want to get, halfway through the day and, have this notification app kill half your battery. Okay. And I think I already mentioned this earlier about the memory. So because, like, I guess your WebWorks apps are limited in memory, like, a lot of times what you'll do is you'll test, WebWorks browser, and you'll find it works fine there, but then you package it up, and then all of a sudden, why doesn't it work? It's crashing a lot. Well, it's because you're running out of memory because it has half what the browser does. So you got to really take that into consideration. So what you can do is, like things like reducing the number of DOM elements. So just be careful, like how many, I guess, like if you look at your HTML tags, try not to nest too much, right? If you kind of keep your, I guess, DOM as flat as possible, then yeah, you kind of reduce the elements there. Also in your JavaScript code, try to cache references. So just a simple thing like a for loop, like you might be doing like, oh, question, yep. Right. I think it came from a best practice site. Yeah. I forget which one. I think it was Yahoo UI guidelines. I think that was their recommendation. That's where I got that number from. Yeah. Yeah, so when you're doing JavaScript code, like a simple thing like a for loop, like a lot of people write a for loop like for a variable I equals 0 to, I is less than some array.length. What you want to do is you want to cache that length. So what you can do is, like instead of that, you do for a variable I equals 0, and then you can do something like I equals the array length, and then what you do is I less than I. So that way you've kind of cached that thing. So basically every time it goes through the loop, it doesn't have to calculate that length every single time. And it looks like I'm short on time here, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up here. So the other things are basically creating a wrapper for functionality that's similar across all the devices. So for the BlackBerry smartphones, you have BlackBerry menus, right? For the playbook, you can do the swipe down menu. So instead of writing separate code for each one, what I like to do is write wrappers for both of them. So I write like a generic API, and basically I do the detection in there. So basically I just manage the code in one spot. I don't have to worry about doing it in two different places. Same for things like sounds as well. So you can write wrappers for that, and use best practices. Right? If you can get your whole team to do this, right, it's a lot easier to kind of debug code. Okay. Do we have time for a demo? Okay, I'll show you a quick demo here of an app that we did. So this is a prototype that we did for SAP. This is a customer financial fact sheet. Let me switch modes here. So this was actually originally a desktop application. So you can kind of see, it's very desktop-like. It's got, the side nav over there. You got a right nav there. You got, the map in the middle. Originally, this was actually Google Maps, and it kind of worked. We were actually able to port it over and, get it running on the playbook, but it was very, I guess, very laggish, I guess, or what's the word, luggish? Sluggish. There we go. And, it had kind of like weird, I guess, user ergonomics. So if you wanted to save a customer, what I had to do was I had to click on the card here, like let's say Universal Studios, and I had to drag it over to that customer favorites area on the right. So user experience-wise, that was kind of a waste. And then I guess for the mobile device, because it was a touch event, and the map in the middle supports touch event, when I actually dragged it over, it would actually make the map pan as well. So you had a lot of conflicts with interactions. So what we did was we kind of cleaned it up a little bit, and instead of having to do that, what you do is you just pull up a card here, and I can just tap on the heart icon, adds it to the favorites. So, user experience-wise, much quicker, much faster. It doesn't use the cool drag and drop features or, techniques, but users don't care about that. Users just want to be able to quickly get in there. And here you can see, so I can, quickly tab here. I can get graphs, invoices. And the original one that we actually did, it actually used jQuery mobile. So we actually ripped all that stuff out, and we just kind of did everything ourselves here. So these are just, just plain divs and just a little bit of CSS just to make it look really cool, and just a little bit of JavaScript there. So this really worked well for the playbook, but then the next request we had was, okay, can we get this to work on a Bold 9900? Right, and I said, well, no, because it's got 3 columns here, and just to kind of simulate, oh, actually this isn't going to work here. So, but you can kind of see everything's going to be really narrow. Like my map is going to be like this, just this little strip down the middle, which isn't going to be very usable. So what we did was we actually kind of rewrote this a little bit, and we started with another version that we called the mini fact sheet. And what we aimed to do was basically use the entire screen real estate for every single screen. Well, except for the first one where we kind of split it into two columns instead of three. Right. So we still have the map here, but what we did here was we used this idea of an endless carousel. Right. So basically, if I actually want to pull up a customer, I tap on this, and what it does is it rotates the entire cube to the customer, and I'm using the entire full screen. And you can see there's very minimal navigation. It's all about content. Content is front and center. There's a little bit of navigation at the top just for, just to support desktop browsers, or, a trackpad click. So if somebody still prefers to click, they can still use the trackpad to go up there and click left and right and stuff like that, right? And if I want to switch to another customer, I just tap on the right-hand side, and I just switch to the next customer. And I can have, like 20 customers, 100 customers, and just keep rotating. Right? But now if I actually want to get into the customer details, what I do is I drill down into it so I can actually flip the cube this way. Right? So customers go across this way, details go this way. So it's a very simple, I guess, paradigm. Right? So I can keep drilling down. Right? So I can, put in just a little spinner there. Believe it or not, that's just CSS. So it's just a little click event and then just a little CSS3 rotation. So that's like 2 lines of code right there just to do a quick little spinner, right? So I don't need a fancy charting library or anything like that. I can do it in 3 lines of code. And ideally, what I should do is I should actually get rid of this slider, right? And I should actually just be able to touch on this thing and just drag and, it'll just make it rotate. So that's what I'll do next time. And you can kind of see the indicators there. So because I'm at the bottom, it actually shows me that, the bottom has been grayed out there. Right, so it's smart enough to actually know that I can still go to the right, so I can actually tap on the right, and I can't go to the top because it's grayed out, and I can tap on that little square icon, and that will take me back to the home. And the nice thing about this is I can actually, because this is kind of like all, it uses the anchor tags, like the hash anchors, so I can actually jump from any page to another page, like to a cube way over here. It's not this kind of sequential flow. Like I don't have to go that way. I can just go from here straight to here, and I can jump back here. Right. So this is kind of a neat idea. And yeah, we actually tried this on a Bold 9900, and it actually works out really well. So I'll see if I can show this to you. So I'm not sure if this is going to work. I'm actually going to use the playbook camera here as like an Elmo device. So this is an idea I got from one of my colleagues, Brent. Thanks for the idea. Hopefully this works. So there you can see there's the actual phone there and the app. I'm not sure if you can see that. Oops. Let's see if I can do this two-handed. So here you can see there's a trackpad support here. Sorry, it's a little blurry. All right, and I can actually come over to the graph, and I can actually click on these points. This is like a drunk driving test or something here. Try to click the dot. All right, I'm just going to touch on it. There you go. So you can see I can actually still interact with the map or the chart there. So that's kind of what we started with. We kind of designed for the lowest device first, and then basically we found that it actually worked on devices like this, and it'll still work on a desktop browser as well. And it's kind of nice because users have all this big screen real estate. Everything's not crammed in there. And all the content is focused, so they kind of get the best of both worlds. All right, switch back here. Okay, so just to kind of summarize again, so the growth of mobile is a huge opportunity. Hybrid apps allow you to target multiple platforms and devices. And definitely use micro frameworks to build your own frameworks. Instead of trying to create your own framework from scratch, you basically take these micro frameworks and you kind of piece them together and just find the right combinations that kind of work for you. And then you get a nicer framework that it's easier for your team to understand as well. So that's really important from an enterprise standpoint. And adopt responsive design principles and follow best practices. Those are my tips. Any questions? Nope. Okay. If you have any questions, actually I have some more links here that you can kind of go to. So there's WebWorks API links, browser score, micro.js. Definitely check out that site. That's probably the best directory that shows you all the different libraries. You can actually go there, type in like I'm looking for animation, and it'll actually give you a list of 10 different animation libraries that you can check out, or DOM or whatever, storage. And I actually have a blog post on doing lightweight maps. It's actually a very detailed blog post. So if you want to check that out, that'll definitely help you out. And actually, I've got kind of like a slideshow on best practices for mobile web development. So it covers like HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript tips. So I can't include everything in here because I don't have enough time, but definitely another thing for you to check out. And I think all these slides are going to be available online. So here everybody's snapping pictures here. All right, thank you very much. If you want to ping me, you can grab me on Jimming there. Uh-oh. Do I have to follow you back?